Hello, welcome everyone to today's training. We'll get started shortly. Welcome everyone. My name is Tanya Risotto, and I am the Regional Business Specialist from the Department of Rehabilitation. Some of you might be thinking, what is the Department of Rehabilitation? Rehabilitation, is that like drug rehabilitation? But no, it's actually vocational rehabilitation. We work with people that have disabilities and get them back into working. We help them get jobs. Thank you. So today, throughout today's presentation, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat and I can answer them at the end of the session. Today we are celebrating and remembering the Americans with Disabilities Act. As some of you may know, July 26th is the day that the ADA was signed by President George H.W. Bush in 1990. So some of the things that we'll go over in today's training is the history of the ADA, some of the regulations, some statistics, and then I will briefly talk about reasonable accommodations. Let's start with the history of the Americans with Disabilities Act. From a legal perspective, a profound and historic shift in disability public policy occurred in 1973 with the passage of Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. Section 504 bans discrimination on the basis of disability. Especially this law was modeled after other previous laws that banned race, ethnic origin, and sex-based discrimination by federal fund recipients. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed by Congress in 1990. It was amended by Congress in 2008. This is the law that protects the civil rights of people with disabilities and many aspects of public life. The history of ADA did not begin on July 26, 1990, at the signing ceremony at the White House. It did not begin in 1988 when the first ADA was introduced in Congress. The ADA story began a long time ago in cities and towns throughout the United States when people with disabilities began to challenge societal barriers that excluded them from their communities, and when parents of children with disabilities began to fight against the exclusion and segregation of their children. It began with the establishment of local groups to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. ADA owes its birthright not to any one person or any few, but to many thousands of people who make up the disability rights movement. People who have worked for years organizing and attending protests, sending out letters, drafting legislation, speaking, testifying, negotiating, lobbying, filing lawsuits, and even being arrested for doing whatever they could for a cause that they believed in. Take a moment to remember Judith Heumann, who passed away this year on March 4th, 2023. Judith Ellen Heumann was an American disability rights activist known as the Mother of Disability Rights Movement. She was recognized internationally as a leader in the disability community. Human was a lifelong civil rights advocate for people with disabilities. She was interviewed in the video that we're going to watch soon because she was in the documentary called Crip Camp, which is a documentary film on Netflix if you want to watch it. As we remember Judy Heumann, we can watch this short video that interviews her and other disability advocates about the disability rights movement. They also are in the Netflix documentary called Crip Camp. Crip Camp is about a groundbreaking summer camp for teens with disabilities who proved to be so inspiring that a group of its alumni joined a radical disability rights movement to advocate for the historic legislation changes. So let's take about a 10-minute video to watch. We can't hear the sound, so you might want to play it from the internet or share your sound. I still can't hear it. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. I already have it ready. Okay. Second. Okay, let me know if you can't hear it.
But you probably haven't thought about the... You might take one every day, but you probably haven't thought about the layout of an elevator, unless you're a person with a disability. Chances are that you don't really think about any of the human-made physical structures you access each day. Architects and engineers refer to these things and spaces as the built world. It's a world that determines how we live and where we work. You might not have noticed, but much of that physical environment has quite literally been shaped by laws that protect the rights of people with disabilities. Before these laws were passed, places like restaurants, doctors' offices, and schools were not made with disabled people in mind. Being met with barriers such as stairs, narrow doorways, no curb cuts made it difficult, if not impossible, for many people with physical disabilities to access these spaces. Inaccessible buildings and transportation provided a routine reminder that the built world was made strictly for the non-disabled. But all that partially began to change with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, specifically with the enforcement of Section 504 that prohibits federally funded programs, agencies, and buildings from discriminating against disabled people. Section 504, as it is commonly known, also paved way for the historic signing of the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, in 1990. As chronicled in Crip Camp, it took years of relentless advocacy and protest before these laws were passed, and much of it was organized by a group of disabled teenagers who met at a summer camp in upstate New York, Camp Jened. And thanks to these former campers and many other leaders, our built world changed. Among the long list of things the ADA accomplished, like protecting against employment discrimination, it is now a legal requirement for our physical landscapes to be architecturally accessible to disabled people.
Well, before the ADA and even the passage of the regulations, the 504 regulations, it was really, really tough. Anything that I really wanted was at the whim of other people.
We couldn't come into the movie theater if we couldn't transfer out of our wheelchair. We had no expectation of accessible bathrooms. Our expectations basically were low.
In some cases, the change measures in inches. In other instances, entire new structures have been created.
The experience of making this film has radically changed the way I view the world around me.
You've already seen the ADA's impact on our built world. You just may not have noticed it. For instance,
our tax money was going into buses and trains, but we couldn't get on it.
I also grew up in New York. I used to subway a lot. I used to go to the subway, climb up and down the steps. I was more worried about the police. I was more worried about the police than I was about getting up and down because the police would stop us.
Did you understand?
No.
So the subways in New York were not accessible at that time. But Neil was able to get around, and what he would do is he would frequently go up and down the stairs on his butt, and the police, instead of helping him, would frequently tell him he couldn't do it. So denying the right to transit.
So before the ADA, most people with physical disabilities couldn't access public transportation. It meant that many people couldn't even leave their homes. But nowadays, public transportation has become accessible for many, adding features like ramps, accessible seating, and elevators in some subway stations. The ADA also has provisions for streets and sidewalks. They can be inaccessible to wheelchair users and people who are blind or low vision. You know those small ramps you see everywhere built into the pavement? Those are curb cuts, and they're meant for a disabled person to safely navigate the streets, not just for your scooter. So now, not only can a wheelchair user easily maneuver between the sidewalk and the street, but a blind or low vision pedestrian can also know when they've reached a street.
And ask anybody who's pushed a stroller how much easier it is to use a curb cut.
Parking lots, too, have been transformed by the ADA.
When I got my car at the age of 17, there were no handicap parking spots. And so I had to find locations where I could get my wheelchair in and out of my station wagon.
It's totally different now. For every 25 parking spaces in a lot, at least one needs to be for accessible parking. And some of those accessible parking spaces must be wide enough for a person with a disability to safely exit a vehicle. And by the way, those reserved parking spaces also follow ADA rules. But what about buildings themselves? Not only were public spaces inaccessible for people with disabilities, but often there were architectural barriers in their private homes as well.
I grew up in a home and I lived on the second floor of a walk-up apartment building, and my parents never thought about moving. My parents thought that the only alternative was to make me walk. And so I spent years and years and years without a wheelchair, walking on crutches, and it really wasn't the best way for me to get around, but it was the only solution that my parents and therapists and non-disability and the people had for somebody like me.
Just simply being able to get into businesses where, you know, there's a step up. And so I couldn't get into many places.
But that ramp you usually walk past on a regular day? Yep, that was installed as per the ADA because stairs just don't work for everyone. Ever wonder why there's usually a static door or a gate next to a revolving door? That's right, to make it easier for a person in a wheelchair to access the building. But once inside, a building's interiors could also be a barrier for people with disabilities. Take bathrooms, for instance.
Yeah, I can get into your restaurant, but, you know, I want to be able to hang out there for a while. And if your bathroom is not accessible, it's really kind of a no-go for me to be there.
You know those wide bathroom stalls? They're not fitting rooms or places to do your yoga. Those were created to give enough room for wheelchair access. Also, for a wheelchair user, sinks that are too high without leg space are cumbersome. But by following the ADA guidelines, sinks can be installed at the right level to be accessible. And it's not just the buildings and the streets and transportation that need to be ADA compliant, it's the things you never consider. Like that elevator from before, you don't notice it while using it, but the usable parts are at a certain height from the ground to be wheelchair accessible. But here's the thing, it doesn't cater to a person who's blind. Our built world is therefore selectively accessible.
Many people who have a disability and are protected by Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act don't see themselves in this law.
And it's incomplete. Like, not all subway stations have built-in elevators. For instance, only a quarter of New York City's subway stations are accessible. Similarly, restaurants far and wide have yet to adopt Braille menus for blind people. It has been 30 years since the ADA was signed, but its laws are yet to be universally applied to our built world.
I think that some people think that the ADA is, if we follow these rules, we're doing it right. The ADA is a floor, it's not a ceiling.
And that's a problem, because unless it applies everywhere, people with disabilities cannot fully participate in their communities.
If I have to feel thankful about an accessible bathroom, when am I ever going to be equal in the community?
A good first step is to begin thinking about disability rights as basic human rights.
Would you like to see handicapped people depicted as people?
Excuse me?
It can't just be on us as disabled people to be making these changes. It really has to be a societal change.
The ADA actually improves access for all. I mean, think about it. You've probably used the elevators in the subway station. There were some before the ADA, but now entire systems have them. And that's just one example of how we all benefit from the ADA every day.
I think one of the most beautiful things I learned about working on the project was this concept of universal design. And it's the idea that if you design something or you make something that works for all people, it's going to be better for everybody.
So, on any given day, when you do end up using an ADA feature, you have a generation of disability rights activists to thank for that convenience.
So you all have us to thank for this.
Okay, I hope you guys heard that video. Oh, another video starting. Were you guys able to hear it?
I could hear it.
Okay, great. It's like during the whole time I'm like, I hope it's working. Okay, give me a second. I gotta get myself back. Okay. So, as you can see in the video that of where, you know, how the ADA got started. Sorry, I have allergies. Okay, so let's move on. What is a disability? The ADA protects people with disabilities. A disability is someone that has a physical or mental health impairment, and that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So for example, if a person loses their hand in a car accident or something and they can't, it affects their daily life. It could also be like mental health illnesses like depression, anxiety. I'll give you more examples in a minute. But a disability is also a history or record of having such an impairment, such as cancer that is in remission or is perceived by others as having such an impairment. These are like more obvious disabilities, like a person that has scars from a severe burn or lost their leg or something. Okay. Okay, so you're a qualified worker if you're able to complete the job tasks that are fundamental to your position with or without reasonable accommodation from your company. The law requires your employer to work with you on adjustments or modifications that will allow you to complete your work, so long as it doesn't create an undue hardship for the company. So some examples of covered ADA disabilities and conditions are, as I mentioned, depression, multiple sclerosis, hepatitis B, epilepsy, diabetes, cancer, and hearing loss. Okay, so now just a few statistics. 1 in every 4 people have a disability. So this shows that disability is common and normal, and anyone can become disabled at any time. It's not something people should be ashamed about or not able to talk about with your employer. So just a few stats. 30 in the United States, about 30 million people have difficulty walking or climbing stairs. 12 million people require assistance of others with their everyday tasks. There's 8 million that have vision difficulty. They're either blind or partially blind. And hearing difficulty, 7 million people have hearing difficulty. 3.6 million use a wheelchair, and 2.4 million have Alzheimer's, or senile, or have dementia. Now we're going to take a poll. The purpose of this poll is to show you that having a disability is more common than you think, and that all of us know people or have a disability ourselves. Like I have a disability. So go ahead and take the poll. Do you know someone, or do you have a disability? This is not sharing. I'm not going to share your name or anything. This is just a general poll. And while I'm waiting for the poll, I'll just share that my own story. I was in a car accident in 2011. I was driving and the traffic was stopping, but the person behind me wasn't paying attention, probably on their phone, and ran into me into the back of my car, pushed me into another lane. Then a big truck, it was like a Dodge truck, not like a Dodge truck pushed me off the freeway. My car was totaled and my back has never been the same. Like it eventually turned into arthritis, and you cannot tell just by looking at me that I have a disability, but I have pain every day. And the doctor says, take Tylenol, take ibuprofen for pain, but I'm not a person that likes to take medicine every day. So I kind of just put up with the pain, and the kind of chair that I sit in at work has to be like soft and comfortable, or else I'm in more pain. So these kinds of things shouldn't be ashamed to share about. So let's share the results. We had 6 out of 6 people either know someone or they have a disability themselves. It just shows that it's nothing to be ashamed about and it's normal. And so, yeah. So thank you for taking the poll. Okay, so moving on. So if you are an employer or you're an employee, reasonable accommodations can be requested. So to initiate the interactive process with the employee's disability is known or apparent. When it's known or apparent, when the employer requests accommodation, an employee presents a doctor's note with work restrictions. An employer otherwise becomes aware of a need for accommodation through a third party or observation. And when these requests and resulting conversations between the employee and the supervisor start the interactive process, which is an important component to the accommodation procedure. So that's, if you have a disability and you need an accommodation, you just need to let your employer know and fill out the paperwork. So the ADA protects from these common forms of discrimination: refusing to hire a job applicant based on their disability, firing or demoting an employee because of their disability, failing to give disabled employees the same opportunities, harassing an employee based on their disability, and failing to provide reasonable accommodations. You ever have, been discriminated against, or someone that has been discriminated against? They can report it to the Fair Employment and Housing Act. The Fair Employment and Housing Act. And this is the website you can go to read more about it, but this provides protection from harassment or discrimination in employment because of age, for people 40 and older, ancestry, color, creed, denial of family and medical leave care acts, disability, mental and physical. So that's included in there. And also that includes HIV and AIDS, marital status, medical condition. There are rights for people with disabilities. And if you'd like to read more, this is the website. If you want to read more about the Fair Employment and Housing Act for California. Okay, so some more resources. If you want to read more about the Americans with Disability Act, this is the website. Also, the Job Accommodation Network, that it has I'm going to show you that website in a minute. It's for reasonable accommodations. And then, as I gave you the other website on the previous slide, that's the same one. And then my agency's website for Department of Rehabilitation is also listed here. So just briefly, I'm going to share my screen and show you the website. Let me open it really quick. Really love this website. It's good for employers and employees that are unsure about, let's say somebody has multiple sclerosis and you don't know anything about multiple sclerosis. You can go to this website and read about it and read about the different kind of accommodations for someone that has that illness. Okay, so I'll share my screen. Full screen. Okay. See if I can move this all the way. Okay. So this is the JAN network. It's askjan.org. If you ever want to look up a disability and read more about accommodations for that disability, it has it listed from A to Z right here, all the disabilities, or most of them probably. Let's say somebody has Marfan syndrome. Never even heard of that before. You can go on here, you click on it, you can read all about it. Accommodating employees with Marfan syndrome, questions to consider, what limitations does an employee have, and what are the problematic areas that they're having. So it just kind of like, you can refer here, how is are they having tiredness or fatigue? Are they having problems lifting? Are they having stress? So you know, this is a great website and resource to have if you ever want to read more about specific disabilities. So it's the Job Accommodation Network. I just wanted to share that briefly with you. And that concludes our presentation. Does anybody, oh, actually, the last slide I want to also show you as well, has your Office of Civil Rights email. So you can write it down if you ever feel like you need accommodations, or if you're having, you know, you feel like you're being discriminated against. And you can also email me. My name, that's my email at the bottom, and I can help you if you're, you know, give you advice and see what we can do to help you. And yeah, so I can also put it in the chat maybe, or let me see. Okay, so now if anybody has any questions or wants to share, maybe you can put it in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm not sure how you guys want to do it. And let me see in the chat.
I see one question in the chat and I'm not sure if it was answered. Sinead wrote, what is the best resource for updates and changes to the LEAP program? And I'm not sure if OCR response that Jan is a great resource was the response to her question or not, or if it was a separate response.
There's also here, I'll put the website for the LEAP program.
Wonderful.
Hold on, give me 1 second. But see, I'll put it in the chat. There's actually a phone number and you can talk to someone from my, well, actually, CalHR has a LEAP specialist. So I'm going to put the email and the phone number in the chat for you. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to interject, this is Molly from OCR. I'm also the LEAP coordinator for our office with CDFA. So if anybody has any questions, you can just email me and I'm happy to speak about any of the LEAP programs, any updates that are going on. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah. I wasn't sure. Okay. So I put that in. Any other questions? Thank you so much for having me today. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya, for all the information and for all the hard work. We really appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you. Happy to celebrate ADA as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
Okay. Okay. You guys have a good day.
Have a great day, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your lunches.
Bye.